Hola, welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and white scars terminators to that 6+++ show. I am your host, Tom. I'm back once again with the lovely 6++ nerds to talk all things Warhammer 40,000 with you. Tonight, we're talking combat. We have a very special guest on, a friend of mine from the England setup who is no stranger to combat and getting his hands dirty in melee, and is going to offer some thoughts and just hopefully some general whimsy and stories, because he's always good for that, with you tonight. We'll introduce him in just a second. I'm going to do the boring people first, starting where I always like to start with my dear leader, Chris. Chris, how are you?
I am surviving, I think would be fair to say. I've had one of those days, so I'm excited to be here and talk about things 40k. It's been a couple of weeks now, so got to get back on the train, got to get ready for the big stuff at the weekend.
Yes, absolutely. And of course, we've got an Eldar book, which I'm sure has been occupying your thoughts. Has anything exciting with that jumped out at you yet?
Oh yeah, so I've been firstly spending lots of money, as you know, you've got to buy all the new stuff, haven't you?
Crucial, absolutely crucial.
That is the most exciting part of any new release, is buying more things. So yeah, I've bought all the stuff. Am I going to use most of it? Probably not, but it's fun. And then it's working out how I can best use Harlequins, really. So that's been my mission. I'm not entirely sold on pure Harlequins, so I'm thinking I want to try and get mostly Harlequins. The list I've built are around 1,300 points Harlequins, and it's because I've got everything I want there. And it's like, well, what else can I add to try and flesh out maybe some of the weaknesses that Harleys will have? Very exciting times.
I played against it yesterday, the Harlequins. I think it's really cool. I think it's got some fun stuff. The Solitaire is actually good when he gets to try twice, is the good news. That's
statistically more likely.
Makes a huge difference to his quality of life.
Oh, he adds it to like a 50% chance that you can now do
exactly. He's definitely a guy that does stuff now. So that's fun. And so they're a bit like Angron. They thought, what do people hate about the Solitaire? Oh, it's because he dies before he does anything useful. Let's give them a second go. People will love it, and it definitely works.
Solitaire, the new Angron.
Yes, they're basically the same. Yeah. We know both combat legends for this combat episode. I'm also joined tonight by my sensei. I only saw him yesterday for our lunchtime Q&A, but he's back once again. Scrivo, how are you?
I'm really good. I did some hobby last night. I spent 10 minutes PVA gluing little mini leaves on bases, because that's what we do here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
so that makes them roll better. So
it better. It really better.
Yes. Absolutely. Cool.
I need all the help I can get.
Has that been your main hobby preoccupation since the last one?
I've spent, since we played at Northern Warlords, I've literally been planning basing concepts. It's weird how this can take over your life, but it's because I didn't like my grey basing. So now I've got brown basing with leaves. Who knew that would get me this excited?
Yeah, fantastic. Forest walking all over the place. Looks good.
Exactly.
Yeah, as for myself, I have basically been playing games, testing different things out. We've got a squad of us going to Pyra very soon, and that's been occupying my thoughts and my time. And we're still on a journey to find the right thing, but we'll get there. I'm certainly having a lot of fun playing against all the other lads that I'm going with, so it's been really, really good. You, the chat, start piping up. Let us know what you're up to. I want to know what you're hobbying, what you're playing. Have you played against New Eldar yet? Was it so terrible you'd never want to play it again? Was it so awesome? It's what you want to play for 3 months? Have you got the ultimate counter? Let us know. Eldar counters only in the chat, please. And obviously, a little brief reminder before we dive into our guests and the topic. Old like and subscribe is much appreciated. Comments, much appreciated. We are having something of a record month. We are cruising towards 100 YouTube members. We'd love to hit it this month. So if you fancy signing up as a YouTube member tonight, that will get us a couple of steps closer to being at 100 YouTube members, which would be really, really cool. Money for me and Chris and our yacht and our lawyers' fees and our Botox. I think they were the things that various people said that we needed. So that's what we will be getting.
Yeah,
okay.
I need lip fillers.
Yeah. I've always thought
that. Look at it. That's what I need.
Maybe some reduction surgeries here and there.
But where, though, Tom?
But where? That's not for this show. We will move it along. I'd like to dive into the main segment these days. And of course, our main segment is a man. He's a stoic individual. You've seen him out and about. He's a veteran of the 40k scene. He's quite wonderful. And he also has one of the lovely sort of English whimsical voices of 40k. So I hope I've not done him up too much before we start. But I'll introduce him. He is of Warmasters fame, the wonderful Raf Harbinson. Raf, how are you doing, mate?
Looking for this whimsical legend that you're talking about. But lovely to be here, guys.
Yeah, fantastic. Really good to have you on. What I wanted to do, just selfishly, before we actually get into combat, Raf, is get the history. Because I know through recent connections that you have a fantasy history, Warhammer fantasy.
Yes.
But I want to know how back this thing goes and when the transition to 40k happens.
That's a very good. Well, I started playing Games Workshop stuff when I was 11, right? Classic parents drop off at Games Workshop as a day crash, and then not realizing how much money it's going to cost both of us for the following 30 odd years. But so I did the classic, play for a while into my teens, have a break for uni, and all that entails, and then I got podcasts of all things got me back into. Weirdly, 40k podcasts got me back into fantasy. So
okay.
I was commuting a lot for whatever reason at the time, and Australians. There was a bunch of Australian podcasts, like in probably 6th, 7th edition or something, that they were just talking. Then that made me. I moved to London, walked into the Games Workshop that was in Plaza, and started. They were playing fantasy at the time, so I was like, it was a classic case of first job in London, living in a 1-bed
hole.
I think there was literal hole, right? But it was X amount of pounds a month, and everything else was spending money, so that all went to Games Workshop and alcohol. But so quickly got into the competitive scene. This is Fantasy 9th edition, I guess, or whatever edition it was, 8th edition. And got into that. The competitive juices got flowing, and sort of set about the classic. When you're young, free, and single, and you get to go to an event every month at least, if not 2, for a while before life settled in. So got quite into that. I was playing in the England ETC team for a while. I was annoyingly chose to get married at the same time as the WTC/ETC. So I was on the selection committee for that for a few years before I finally got to go. And then did about 5-6 ETCs before they spun out the WTC bit. On the fantasy side, was a bit. They basically switched. They killed obviously they killed old school fantasy, and the ETC went with its own game system based off the original, and mostly for the social scene and nothing else. Sort of kept playing that. But I miss. You know what I miss? The thing people complain about a lot in with Games Workshop is the wheel of power that's always changing. The thing that's good today, 6 months from now. Whereas if you get a game that's actually perfectly balanced, it doesn't change, right? And that's the aim of the fantasy successor, was to get to this perfectly set series of rules. And then it was COVID, and I guess what edition was that? The one that came out around
9th came out in COVID.
9th. Yes, I got back into it 9th. I was like, you know what? Now's the time. I thought the sensible thing to do was paint a White Scars army because I had nothing but time, and I thought I'll paint like 2,500 points. I'll have all the stuff I need.
That's how it works.
Those 2,500 points look quite nice. Do not ask to see the stuff that came out once I started going to events and realized that Marines just need more purchases every single event. God. Then just got massively into it, really. And then hard cut. Somehow it's years later, and here we are. But
absolutely. And once again, been a staple in and around the international scene. Obviously, went to WTC as a coach last year, in the squad this year. So it seems that that's just in your blood to be seeking that out.
Traveling for gaming is addictive, man. It's something about it.
It really is. It really, really is.
There'd be no other reason for me to go to a random city in the outskirts of Brussels, right? Other than
other than 40k.
I love Mechlin. So
it's so cool. It's just.
I can't believe they're moving it.
I don't know. I know. I'm sure there are logical reasons. I don't get it. But anyway, that's another one for another day. So today's segment is about combat.
On the hobby side, just to go back on that. I don't know. This I just took a picture of my shelf over there of the last time I got slightly into Eldar and bought all this stuff that I never ended up needing. So that's 3-foot high stack of Eldar boxes, and then
rookie numbers.
Bought an army for ITT, which was this weekend, and then 11:45 on this submission, they decided to actually change armies completely. So I now have a bunch of nonsensical Custodes to paint. But that's my
It's good. It's good. Last minute faction changes. Who would love them?
Ed. Ed
would never do that.
I mean, I played against Ed this today. It is good, guys. So don't worry, we're fine. We're going to be okay. It's pretty good at what it does. Alrighty, so we're going to be talking combat today. Raf came to mind because I know Raf is a big fan of combat. So what I'm going to do before we dive into sort of how you can improve and scale up your game as a combat-focused player in 40k. I suppose I was going to invite you, Raf, to pitch to the uneducated, to the unconverted. Why should they become a combat player? Why, perhaps, is this the way to do business in 40k?
God, how long have you got? I mean, fundamentally, what's cool about 40k, right? It's just like pseudo sci-fi setting that for some reason warfare's descended to the point where people run around at each other with axes and chainswords. Like,
yeah,
you want to play shooting, go play some sensible game, right? That's the first thing. Or Tau, I guess, but that's no, it's I, as Tom will know, have this slightly annoying and aggravating thing about wanting to be slightly snowflakey, I guess is what you call it, in my approach to the game. And the shooting game, right, the 40k game, if you take as a classically played, is quite solved as a mechanism of what you do, right? You move, you get the angles, you shoot, and it's trying to find a different way of doing it that, to be very blunt, a lot of it's down to, obviously I like it, but also it's a lot of it's to do with trying to take away the advantage of someone who's had a lot more experience, because I don't get as much practice as other people.
Okay.
So if everyone is playing poker a lot and is all expert at poker, and you turn up and you want to play chess or whatever, checkers probably, because combat's quite simple. It's a version of asymmetric warfare, like, effectively on the tabletop, because people are used to doing X and Y, and that trading game of, you deploy resources, you shoot. And you go, I'm not going to play any of that game. And actually, I fell in love with it at the height of 9th, during the what felt like 7-year-long Drukhari summer, when they were the bane of all Marines, and I'm a Marine player at heart. And I was like, I can't compete with this shooting thing, right? They just do it better. They've got more stuff. They're all in boats. You finally get an angle. You kill something, doesn't matter. It lands on a thing there. And I took a step back and went, okay, what if I don't spend those 400 points they're spending on transports, and I just put it into more combat? And just focus on doing one thing in the game as well as possible. And it kind of all spiraled from there, right? It's a fundamentally different approach. We can get into, there's different types of combat approaches, right? Like, you can play proper 40k, which is more of a trading thing with, just feeding those units, and it's a classic game. You just don't do the damage and shooting. You do it with, I guess Drukhari can still do a lot of that, right? You still do the grenade trading type thing with bits. But and then there's the other way, you just complicate the board state and flip the whole narrative on its head and try to just frazzle the opponent by declaring 15 charges on the same turn and just seeing what happens at the end of it. So I like being stressed out when I play. So that means play a game that's basically a knife fight, and you can't make mistakes in the early game, because you just lose. So and that gives me an excuse for when I lose. I can just be like, oh, it was this thing. Obviously overpowered shooting nonsense.
And I think there's lessons in that, and I think it's something that we've seen in 40k a lot, right? I think the idea of going all into that as a concept is big. I think, rather than trying to, especially with the way rule sets are for different armies, rather than trying to plug in some of the stuff that you do going hard into what you do well, and the offset that gives you, but also the resource edge that can give you, is definitely a very big deal. I think, certainly from my own experience playing against armies of yours, like your White Scars list, which I played against, I think, at Beachhead, it plays primary phenomenally well when that is what you're doing, right? If it's guys chasing discs and it's not getting distracted with flitting around the edges of discs, trying to shoot things or trying to be in clever places, there's a sort of laser focus on score and outcome, which is very good, I think, when it's delivered well. And some of the best combat armies in the game are really good at that. And as you say, it is knife edge stuff, because if you don't make that jump from A to B, it can be rough. But that gives you a real lock in on the score.
I think that's the key, right? I think it was quite interesting taking a step back when a couple of friends of mine from the fantasy side were sort of getting into 40k. I'm sort of teaching them, for whatever better word, in the early days. And if you break it all down, right? 40k is a game of primary, right? If you're trying to explain it at the very base level, it's like, I've got to control these points. And combat, I guess, getting up on primary, not only, it's obviously good for your score, but it by definition affects the opponents, right? And then the other stuff can be sorted out. It gets much more complicated than that, but at a high level. So that is, yes, it's exactly, it allows you to focus on the things. So like, I'm going to control primary and I'm going to punch you in the face. And thankfully in this edition, a lot of primary also comes from standing around where the objectives are. A lot of secondaries also come from that, right? So accidentally you end up scoring a bunch of points. But yeah, so it's simplifying the meta game state and complicating the board state is basically at the heart of it all.
Yeah. Absolutely. Very nice. I mean, John or Chris, I don't know if you have anything to add on this in terms of your own experience with combat and why it appeals.
Yeah, I think you kind of, the important point there is like your opponent is generally in the place they want to be. And if you're standing there shooting them, you're removing them from that place, but you're not putting yourself in that place. Whereas by getting to do the charges, you're putting yourself in the place where they want to be, and they've now got to deal with you. Meanwhile, you can be doing whatever you want. It obviously reduces the pressure that they're able to put on you. I know I hate it when people just full send their armies at me, because it just creates that on-board pressure, but also that mental pressure, right? You know, there's nothing worse than whatever, hundreds of orcs just sat there or whizzing their way through you, and you know you're now like on a clock. So it's giving you that kind of that mental advantage, I think, over your opponent as well. Plus, you know, when you get to, I mean, it's a bit more fiddly these days, isn't it? But I know in things like 9th edition, the tricks you could pull and that sort of thing. And obviously there's some stuff you can still do, but it was quite glorious. And there's nothing worse, even these days, like when I played Jack Tite the other day with his Death Watch, and, you know, it's I've charged, I fought him, and he's like, right, what can I do now? And you're like, oh shit, what have I missed? And he's trying to work out, like, well, how can he get the best situation? Yeah. And so often you see people who are just like, cool, I'll charge that, you know, get the poker or the chip stick and just push all their models in against the against your models, and just say, right, let's roll some dice, or won't bother piling or consolidating. And there's so many missed opportunities. So I think if you're good at it, or if you have an awareness of how many advantages it can get, I think it can be a really enjoyable part. I used to love it in 9th, 10th. It's pissed me off a bit more, to be honest, but it's just having to jump through more hoops unnecessarily. But actually, it's still a very satisfying part of the game. Yeah, sure, rolling and then re-rolling a load of dice and that thing's now dead. Huzzah! You know, that's good, but the satisfaction of the game is quite often from manipulating the fight phase and that sort of thing. You get a lot of self like satisfaction from that.
Yeah,
completely. Scribber?
That was literally what I was going to go with. To me, it feels more rewarding when you kill something, because you've run across the board, charged them, then hit them. That's great. Whilst if you shoot something and you go, right, I've shot all my guns at you, you're dead, I'm still in my deployment zone, it just feels a bit lackluster. I don't find that exciting. And to touch on what Raf said at the beginning, it's not a science fiction game. That's the biggest lie of it. It's science fantasy. You're playing knights and dragons and shit. It's literally going up and beating people is what the game is.
Yeah, absolutely. Raf, you had a point there?
No, I was just going to say, there's also something fundamentally, if you're not very good at maths, combat's where you're at. Right, because
you got me. You fucking got me. You got me straight on.
Outside of, you know, the odd thing that raises its head and dominates the scene for a while, whatever it is, you know, Deathwatch Sternguard for like that 2 weeks or whatever it is, right, where you just throw masses of dice and it kills everything. Generally speaking, a shooting platform has X number of shots, and you can, like with a tank, there's only so many you can get down a shooting line, and you're relying on maths basically to be like, there's enough shots here and enough, it's going to cascade to enough failed saves, enough. But the reality is in 40k, we talk about averages. We talk about, you know, this is why I'm largely against data as a thing in 40k. We talk about, you know, predictive dice curves, everything, right? But on any given activation, it's a small number of dice that you're rolling. So anything can happen, right? There's every chance. Yeah. It's not remotely crazy if like a knight shoots at a unit of scouts and doesn't kill them all, right? Or whatever just a points differential example. Whereas combat's one of the few times you can actually get into a situation where you are throwing 100 dice at something, right? Not always, and you know, obviously different types of combats out there, but it's one of those where if you go for a Napoleonic type of approach, you're putting as much a concentration of force, right? Of being like, at this point of contact, I am going to make sure whatever happens, like I'm taking dice as much as one actually can out of the equation, so that when the dust settles, that thing's going to be dead. I'm going to be on the primary, and we can take it from there. Yeah. And I'm not one to work out the maths of, you know, of a repulsor shooting into X thing, right? Because my opponent will roll too many 4-ups, and it'll upset me, and I'll blame that for a while. So there's a simplicity to it as well.
Yeah, completely. I mean, there's upsides included as well, right? Because, you know, as I say, with a lot of combat, even if you don't quite kill a thing, you'll have got somewhere. If you've made it, you've got somewhere. Especially when you're playing into other shooting armies, you're like, well, worst case is I'm now over there, and that causes problems. it can cause, I think you've made the point already, but it lends itself well to sort of overload play, which I actually think works really well in 10th in a lot of the time, right? This kind of, here's a lot of stuff, you have to make a lot of decisions. I'm creating all sorts of variants, and in a game where outputs have dropped off a bit for some armies, there are more points of failure, and if you can get them in situations where it only takes one bad turn here, and then actually you're not going to get to try that again, or if you are, you're not going to get to try that again in the places of the board that matter. That's very powerful, and that's one thing I think a lot of the top players would say in 10th is that it's really been a very real battle for space as well, and I think combat armies are often better positioned to win a battle for space. The best shooting players will push you and put things there, and there's the huge difference between the Tau player that's going forwards at you and the one that isn't in terms of how resources are used. But I think, obviously, again, combat gets you into thinking about the primary, about putting pressure on the opponent, about going out and controlling and dominating space, and it lends itself well to that. And the best combat units in the game at the moment are just world beaters.
And also, I guess slightly, I'm not sure it's controversial, but playing pure combat makes you better at shooting. Like it's fascinating. Like, you play enough combat, and you can have some shooting in there, sure. Right? As much as I resent it now, it often forces me to put some shooting in my list. But you learn to hide. Like it's fascinating if you play combat for a while, and then you realize that people just don't really hide. And so you see these full-on gun, you see these 3 tank, 3 dreadnoughts lists just getting hundreds on people, and you're like, why are we getting shot? Like, what's going on? Like, now, good players will know how to work the angle, work the terrain, etc. But I'm just saying, as on an average thing, you learn that the value of actually you can hide a lot, right? And it's about the pace. Combat's all about tempo, about on any given matchup, when you're going in, when you're pushing, when is the turn, right? Then you're going for it. Some armies can just do it turn 1 and go for it, right? You go first, you whatever, right? You world eaters, you're in a deployment zone. Maybe that's the game plan in that particular thing.
Yeah.
But it makes you much better in the shootouts as well when you get used to the fact that actually you can take some time out, hide, and that can throw a lot of people slightly out of the loop because people like trading blows, right? They like, you shoot me, now I shoot you, vice versa. And you're like, I'm not going to interact with you for the first 2 turns of this game. And you're like, but I've paid a bunch of points for all my shooting and it's not doing anything. I'm like, well, yeah. So
exactly.
And you can't kill me.
A lot of good combat players. It's those couple of turns of things creeping into position, and you're twitching. You're sort of, if you're in the gun player position, you're like, I would love to be able to do something. I'm not getting any agency here, and it can be very explosive in that sense. And like I say, I think if that's your way of engaging, you can pick your moments. And obviously there are things you have to do well to create those moments, which we'll get to in a moment. Matt Karagami in the chat says, I'm liking the thought of I killed you and I'm still in my deployment zone versus I killed you and I'm on the objective. Yeah, I think that's the big thing. Right? I think with the way terrain has changed as well, actually, combat armies have had relatively happy hunting in recent times as well. There have been plenty of boards and terrain setups where they can do their thing pretty effectively. It's not as easy as it used to be for leaf blower armies to blow their leaves.
It's been a big push, hasn't it? Like, I mean, I started playing in 8th, and you compare it to a standard terrain setup in 8th compared to now. Like, even if you take the UKTC, they've been adding more and more stuff each time. Like every edition, it's shooting's really powerful. We need to now add more terrain, and we're at this stage now where you've got WTC boards which can be pretty dense. You've got GW with the big blocks. You've got UKTC with the stuff going across the middle. So there's been a big push. You've got big staging areas, so it is trying to direct you. Because I mean, as we say, like if you've got an amazing combat army and an amazing shooting army, and there's no terrain, the amazing shooting army wins every time. So you have to try and balance it up. And I think we're getting in a reasonable place now, where a lot of terrain systems are able to support both. Not that any Tau player would tell you that that's the case.
No, they won't necessarily agree with that. They may have other opinions on that for sure. Okay. Well, what we're going to do is I want to move it towards some sort of fundamentals now, and some key skills and key things to think about that people can bear in mind. And then maybe we can look at the particularities of 10th and the rule set and what that means after that. Right? But if we're thinking in terms of some core principles for someone looking to play a combat army effectively, some things to always bear in mind and things to always be attempting to achieve. We've touched on a few already, but what do we think some of the sort of most important staples of their approach should be?
You got to be ready to lose.
Okay, nice. Yeah, okay.
Look, I love combat. I love combat focused armies, but it is depends where you're your bar of what you want to get out of an event is, right? I mean, let's talk about an event. You're much more likely to win a big event with a shooting focus list because it's less of a knife fight, right? You've got to enjoy that. And I think there's two separate things we can get into about the difference between the micro and the macro approach to combat. But fundamentally, shooting is more forgiving, right? Because every activation you have, they're not activating back, right? And there's nothing, and not all combat armies are made equal, right? So there's nothing worse than taking a combat-focused army and you get to a match and you realize that actually they just do this better than you, and then you really have to think outside the box or just lose, right? So there's a certain amount of
creations of bile in back in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Like that's the and there's plays around it, sure, right? But just on a fundamental level, when you get to the table, you are disfavored in X and Y, and it can be as simple as the maps, right? Some of the UKDC maps are brutal for the not super fast combat armies, right? Some of the distances one has to cover is extreme. If your opponent's being careful about it. So that's just I guess user warning going in is it's not always, it's easier to go, I'm going to have scions that deep strike everywhere and shoot you in the face and then go back up and do it again, right? Than I have, realistically, depending on the type of army you're running, you could easily have 4 combat units and they have to do all the heavy lifting for you. And you expect to lose one on the way in somehow because something will happen, but the other 3 better do stuff. So there's it's really about resource management as well. I think that's a real thing of knowing what. I said I don't like maths, but it's knowing what can do what. Right? It's the different caliber of gun, for want of a better phrase, that you have in your arsenal for combat is really important. Right? I think an ideally designed list, or for whatever faction, you'll have tools that can. I need to go and kill 5 intercessors. I don't. Which tools am I going to use to do that? And I also need to go and kill that knight. Which one or multiple tools do I have to sort of converge on that? So it's just being, I guess, ideally having a wide array of threat profiles that you can bring to bear.
And knowing when those need to go is a big deal. Okay, very good. Chris, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd say probably one of the main ones for me is have a plan of what you're trying to achieve in your movement phase. So like you're moving that unit over there and you're going to charge that thing. Well, actually, it starts with right, I'm here, I move X, and so my charge will be Y, talking that through. And then in your head, you're like, well, is that something I want to do? Because it might have been in their turn, you're thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to go punch that. Then you measure it out, and it's an 8-inch charge. And everyone listening has immediately either gone, oh no, or yeah, and problem. And because everyone's different, right? You play Jack Titan, he's like, oh, 6-inch, don't want to risk it. So it's very different for everyone. And it's you're planning what you're trying to achieve in the fight phase. So that when you get to your fight phase, you're not like, oh, I'll just move in here. Actually, what are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to take back an objective? Are you trying to get behind a wall with your pilot and consolidate? Because that's going to really affect where you move, where you try and position yourself with the charges. We hate you, Jack. There's
a bunch of Warmasters.
Well, Warmasters just suddenly rocked up.
Yeah, NASA's
they've learned what YouTube Matrix.
is. We're meant to be doing our prep for ITT right now, so I said, because I don't do maths.
It is basically 50-50, you're right. Now, I played against a guy once, and it was genuinely terrifying because turn 2, he was like, so I'm going to kill this, and this. And I'm like, how the fuck is he planning on killing all of these things? And then he just proceeded to just drop a load of shit down and roll a load of 9-inch charges. And there is nothing more terrifying than someone just going, that all dies because I'll make my 9-inch charge. And that is their game plan, because
that's and the confidence.
Most of the time it doesn't work. But what if it works this one time and I get absolutely
only does need to work once.
So my general thing would be, as you move, or even at the start of your turn, but as you move into your fight phase and your charge phase, have the plan. What do you want the outcome to be? And so it enables you to position yourself best to try and achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's such a good point.
And I think to kind of piggyback off of that as well is planning what you're going to do next as well. So you've got your first wave, stuff behind it when things go wrong. What's that doing? Where is it going to need to be for if things do go wrong? So you've got your kind of, if you've already got your first wave and there's stuff you've got lined up that you want to be hitting next, is there somewhere that can be safely? Is it somewhere that it can be scoring as well? Like, is it just sitting in the back corner doing nothing? Or is it sat somewhere where it can do containment next turn if you drop it? Or somewhere in the middle staging in case your opponent decides they're going to be pushing for the middle? And it's that kind of thing. I think you just have to look at. I found with shooting armies, you can very much go, I'm going to plan to see what I've seen now. You've come out, now I deal with what I'm going to do here. With combat, you've got to plan what you're wanting to do, then reacting to what they're wanting to do, and then what you do after what you've done. Because if you don't, you're then, right, I'm now back in my deployment zone with half my army. What are they actually going to achieve here?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's golden advice, right? I think I put a lot of this down to what I call momentum, right? I think because if you listen to pro 40k players talk a lot, it can sound quite complicated, right? It's a lot of it's getting the big picture, right? It's because yes, the micro really matters, but just as a case of, I remember listening to a video John Lennon talking about his Dark Angels list, and it's just stuck with me, and it's so right? It's about knowing with a given army, right? So the Dark Angels Gladiators sort of combat focused list is that these 3 units cannot take a step backwards, right? Like for the momentum of the game. Right, the engagements on objectives have to happen on the opponent's side of it, or wherever possible, given terrain and everything else. You cannot allow stuff to get behind you, because charging backwards is a whole turn of movement at least to get back to where you were before, and it's only a 5-turn game, and this is already probably turn 2 or 3, right? So there's no way. So it's exactly, and knowing, and then the building from that is knowing fundamentally, I guess, what the secondary cards exist, right? So that you do have, as you said, assets that can do, especially the important ones, containment, right, which is a lot of points. And knowing which ones might come up that you won't play for, right? It's like, is it worth sacrificing something for X and Y? But it's the big picture of the assets you want in turn 4, let's say, to roughly be here, here, and here.
Yeah.
To get there, I mean, some armies can go backwards and forwards all day because they're fast, right? But like, if you're not that army, it's like, if I want to be threatening their home objective at turn 5, let's say, I can't be in my own half of the table turn 3, right? That's just because something will get in the way, like it just won't happen. So it's that bigger picture thing, I think, is really at the heart of it all.
Yeah, I was going to build on that as well by saying that, and it's something we've kind of alluded to already, but the projection of threat is a huge tool in the combat army's arsenal, right? What it could do and where it could get is in itself a way of making the opponent do things, and that's very useful, especially because, as we've talked about, you can blow out and burn out with combat. You can get it wrong, and so often you're trying to delay and get right the moment of things actually going out. But if you can create that threat of potentially things exploding out, get near objectives, get fast things in places where they can fly over and hit into the back lines, have the threat of things coming in from reserves that force the opponent to basically give you stuff as they try and screen you out and get rid of things. This all kind of helps you to shimmy into a better position in the game, and certainly a lot of combat players, especially when they're starting out, will just try to get you turn 1. And there's not many in the current game that are very good at that, right? There are a lot that are very good at getting you turn 2 or 3, but there are few that can really, really get into a well set up and well deployed army turn 1. And I think the temptation can be to sort of go really early, but actually it's actually often more about getting into a position that then is insufferable for the opponent to leave you in, and that then forces a lot of different things to happen. So I think that's one bit of advice from playing against very insufferable combat players that I've found. Is they don't just let you get your teeth in. They'll be getting closer and closer and making suddenly the onus is on you to do something, even though you're playing against an army that isn't actually going to shoot you.
A lot of the time, the power of the combat army is they don't want you to call their bluff, right?
Yes.
Like a unit hiding in the corner of a ruin with a theory, has advance and charge access, right? Your opponent's thinking, okay, I don't know, that depending on the opponent's risk profile, what are those 3 dice going to add up to, right? Plus your movement. And then you have this whole thing where you can start affecting how they play without ever throwing a punch, because when you go in, things go wrong and you feel bad about life. So there is an element of that. I think one of the fun things about combat, I guess, going back, which I didn't answer very well at the beginning, is the psychological games that you play with it as well. Right? It's that was mentioned, just rolling really, really long distance charges, right, from behind cover, but you're like, oh, it's 11, I'm just going for it.
Yeah.
You do that once or twice, your opponent's immediately like, whoa, right, he's going to keep doing this, and one of them times is going to work, right?
Yeah.
And it can, depending on the player and everything else, but it can really have an impact on how the game plays because they suddenly go, well, they start imagining the worst, right? So
absolutely. No, we have one of those in our own team who's infamous for this. Our lovely Paul James, who's a Dark Angels fan. If you give him a charge, he will try and take it. This is not one of those where you try and be clever and he won't go for a 10 or 11. He absolutely will, and he puts the fear of God into you with that, and that has a huge effect because actually he'll go for those. It means you play differently, and that in and of itself, I say there is a psychological aspect to that. Okay, I mean, I think that's quite a good set of fundamentals. I guess I think one thing that again we've alluded to that is worth bearing in mind is that there is a whole world of counterplay and opponent agency in combat. Right, there is in shooting. It's not that they can't do things in shooting. We've all seen someone pop Armor of Contempt and smoke. People can do really clever things that make your guns
witchcraft.
Yeah, absolutely, unbelievable. Never been done. Not both together. Come on, what is outrageous? But I think I suppose 10th edition and 9th before it, in a lot of ways, have both been rife with counterplays and counter agency for the opponent. And actually, these are very relevant things for you, the combat player, to bear in mind in your own arsenal as well. So I guess if we're thinking about the traps and the pitfalls and the things you need to be able to navigate as a combat player, what are some of those? What are the obvious places it can fall down?
Don't forget heroic intervention, Tom. Not heroic.
I forgot the interrupt. Thank you.
The interrupt. Yeah. Right. Don't forget the interrupt.
I wonder if he's here, Ash, wherever you are.
Ashley. Well, we always know when Ashley's here because he goes, "Oh, hey, Tom, have you?"
Don't forget I can interrupt.
Yeah.
But Ashley, I'm calling it wherever he is. That was a psychological game because he talked about his -1 damage for about 5 minutes, and I was so fixated on -1 damage, I forgot he could also just interrupt. But that's whether that's my games or not, we'll see. I think it's beautiful. What kind obviously just the basics of intervention and interrupt, those are big things. What other kinds of issues do we need to be able to navigate?
I don't want to sound like a broken record, but there's the tempo thing, right? So this is, there's a lot of JL lists that were popular in the last year or so, and it's quite easy to feel like you're massively, life is great, right? You've charged a whole bunch of stuff, you've killed it all. But your opponent is very able to put stuff that doesn't matter, right? And then you're in a position where this happens turn 1 or 2, and then you realize by the end, bottom of 3, you're like, I've only got 3 units left, and those points are ticking the wrong way, right? The bar is sliding to the opponent. So it's knowing what's actually betas. Sounds like they're being big brain about this, but knowing what actually is worth engaging with, right? What happens next? What next? And what? Right. Yeah. So you charge those Kalashans, yes, you want to kill them, sure, but then what? Right?
You're in the open.
You're in the open, and life is not great.
And the Kalashans will be replaced. Yeah. So there's a resource question, isn't there? And I think this is another one which, again, I think tempo, as you say, momentum. It's knowing at which point in the game an army kind of needs to surge almost, because if you're going too soon and you're getting sort of blown out too early and you're losing too many of your big hitters, then your threat just dies off, right?
And key to this is most armies can deal with a thing, right? Whatever it is, Deathwing Knights, right? They're famously tough. Charge them into an army, your opponent will kill them, right? Charge 3 units and 2 other things. By the time they split everything, maybe that unit's still dead, but you have the other 4 alive, or whatever the thing is, right? So it's being aware of when you have it's really about finding opportunities to make things that matter. Either lots of little cuts, right, that just get you into the mid board. You're now threatening too many different things, and their movement starts getting into their head about where they can go that's safe because of the threat ranges and whatever, and they can kill 2 of your assets, but you have 5 there.
Yeah,
because it's all ideally behind walls. Or do they have a thing that you have to kill? And sometimes that's just worth going all in, and that's the important thing. And if that goes away, there's less and less of that in the game at the moment. But so it's a big thing of that. It's not that hard for an opponent to incentivize, psychologically tempt the probably bloodthirsty combat player to make aggressive plays. And a lot of the skill of combat is knowing, the punch you don't throw, right? And
yes.
So it's
and it is
the butterfly and the bee.
It's either going with everything or not, as you say. If it's an overload moment, that's going to give you your best chance of powering through. But it's knowing that if you do that too early and it doesn't work, it's over.
And basic stuff, right? Screening's huge, right? I mean, not only I think the ideal combat army is fast and it flies and it does all sorts of stuff, but a lot of them don't, right?
Yeah.
So there's nothing more annoying for a World Eater army than you go on some annoyingly cheap Votan unit that's 9 inches from you when it starts and it goes first and it advances and it almost hugging you.
Yeah.
You go, great, so I'm going to make 3 inches of movement in my first turn, and then
Yes.
And a lot of armies have access to that, right? So,
yeah.
So it's thinking about that, and so the deployment becomes big as well. So, but as far as counterplay, that's as simple as it gets, and even against the fly stuff, right? I think Sean Naden used to always talk about how a lot of people approach 40k as a game of maths, really, but it's a game of geometry, and even against super fast flying solitaires, whatever, you can block off where they land, right? And which is one of the reasons that units that might look amazing on paper, I mean, Shining Spears, for example, I want to love them, but the reality is a unit of 6 is probably that big.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take much to suddenly be like, if they get in at all, it's one guy swinging, right? And on like UKTC terrain, it's even easier because the walls do the screening for you half the time, and you can then allocate resources you don't care so much to stand in the open ends of this and just sort of dot around so they can't land models where it matters.
Mm-hmm.
So really, the balances are tipped against us because there's a lot. There's a lot you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. Go on, Scary.
So there's also it's the charges you make and the charges you don't make. So at Northern Warlords, I had 2 situations that are complete contrasting. I had an ATV that even if the Doomsday Ark advanced over it, it couldn't physically get past it. So I didn't charge because I didn't need to be in the combat because I actually thought it might kill me. It was on 1 wound and it just stood in the way.
Yeah.
And then kind of the opposite, I couldn't kill Gilliman in combat, theoretically. So I just covered him in tanks. And then he couldn't kill them all. So inversely, he may be good in combat, but if you throw so much into something, he then couldn't get onto a point. Yeah. And that was, again, although that was a combat, it wasn't about actually the output. It was about the positioning. So, like you said, about the kind of...
I think there's
something.
There's a few really big points there about just blocking and shoving things. And that's when you're fighting against other combat, that's a big deal, right? In terms of managing where you connect into things, in terms of knowing how dangerous certain things are and how you can frustrate them, keep them tied up, stop them doing what they want to do. Obviously, the bit of that story that John has left off, because I was watching the end of that game, because my GSC World Eaters game was quicker, was that Gilliman killed one of the tanks. John also exploded it and blew up Gilliman, and that was the end of it. It was really good. I think Mike had calculated. If I do 2 attacks into each tank, I can kill all 3, and then I just need Mephiston to fail both his saves and all his feel no pain. So sure, you can try it. And then he got blown up by the.
I just eyeballed it and went, that should be enough.
I loved it. I just heard your voice over the room going, and this is tri-pointing. I think those are really, really, really good
related to that.
To bear in mind. You go.
So no, just related to that from a army building perspective from the other side, right? I mean, touching on tanks, transports are a bloody nuisance. It's really unfair, I think.
I love transports.
They shouldn't really be allowed, right? Especially those elder ones. You think they'd reach out and just pull the guys out? Like it's so they're just standing right there.
They're just there.
Sword straight through him. There you go.
Yeah, so transports is an interesting one. I mean, obviously, that's where we can maybe get into some of the technicalities of Tenth in terms of how you solve problems like that. But obviously, if we're thinking about techniques, obviously piling and consolidation is different to how it used to be, but there's still quite a lot of agency for getting through situations for a combat player in that sense, right? Obviously, you can kill the screen with one thing or the transport with one thing and then coast into the contents or what's behind it with another unit. And that's where, again, actually often units working in tandem are more effective than one at solving complex problems, right? That's where that overload really comes into effect.
Or 3 units that they can't get out the transport and they just all die.
Indeed.
Then you don't need to fight them. They're just dead.
Indeed. Just keep them in there, right?
I think it's still quite I played a game the other day and it does come up, especially people who are newer to the game. And I suspect at least one person listening to this won't know this, but you can fight things you didn't charge. And that is obviously a big change. And it's taking people who maybe don't specifically read the rules or maybe aren't as used to 40k and that sort of thing. But it's a huge ability that we didn't have in 9th. And so it's something that I would say genuinely, I still will do something maybe once every 2 or 3 tournaments, and they're like, "Wait, what? You can't do that." And I'm like, "Yes, you can." And I mean, we're quite far into the edition now in the grand scheme of things. So yeah, hopefully at least one of you listening has just gone, "You can do what?" So yeah, you can, of course, and that is a huge part, as the guys were saying, in terms of transport. You know, you use one unit to kill the transport, the other unit, because they charge, they get to pile in, they can tag it and punch and kill the second unit, and that's really important. So just understanding, I would highly suggest people who are newer get the rule book out, set up some models, and literally read it line by line and work out what you are allowed to do, and therefore through process of inference and elimination, or work out what you have to do and work out what you can do through the things that it's not telling you, because you can actually do a lot more than you would realize.
Yeah,
I mean, just building off that, because I think it's a fantastic point. Is realize how dangerous. So I said screens are the obvious answer to combat. A badly deployed screen is a loose condition, right? Yeah. I think on multiple ways. One is this, the approach where they either leave gaps, or the unit behind is too close, or you have enough stuff that come in from the edges, whatever, so that you can then tag other stuff, or you have access to a 3-inch pile-in, or 6-inch pile-in, or whatever the thing may be. So that in itself just means you lose more stuff than you should have done. But also a screen deployed too early can just buy you movement, right? I think last game I played, I remember someone threw up a Mandrake screen like in the mid board. I'm like, okay, so 5 units, and then instead of moving 6 inches plus an advance, I'm gonna move 6 inches, charge, pile in, consolidate, and everything is now up to 12 inches further along than it should have been.
Completely.
So that's a real thing. It all ties
definitely. Into that. This is something I'd like to say I've got over it, but you play against an army like Death Guard. That is a huge part of how they actually function, right? They are a lot less scary when you are not giving them charges, but as soon as they have charges, they suddenly, these very dangerous, very tough units are getting places that are, again, basically irretrievable, right? And that's the whole point of Death Guard is, they get a bit of stick and they get laughed at. But once they actually arrive at the place they need to be, it is very nasty for a lot of armies to do anything about it. And so you, the player trying to avoid them, have to not be giving them any fuel for that whatsoever, right? We've got a question from Gordon Chung asking, are you actually allowed to charge elves? Now, this is worth saying. We've already done our Eldar review. We'll get self-promotion in a moment. Right, of all the battle-focused tricks, running away from a charge ain't one. And that is important. It is very relevant. Now, they said some of the detachments have a couple of little tricks and tools here, but not anything other armies don't have. I think getting stuck into elves is important, because God knows you're not going to beat them in a little tit-for-tat, clever shootout, because they've got every tool they could possibly want for making that a nightmare for you. But yeah, very, very powerful. Tenor says I had a squad of 10 Death Guard Terminators moving something like 25 inches in one turn because I screened badly. Yeah.
Great maneuver, isn't it? Like, you get more distance. Imagine. Remember in 9th? I remember. Obviously, it's not so relevant now, but in 9th, when Paul James was playing into Dakari and his opponent put a Reaver unit in his deployment zone for behind enemy lines, and at the end of turn 1, Paul had his Deathwing Knights in his opponent's deployment zone, because you used to be able to do it like that. And that is definitely the case now. Like, if you're just moving to charge, that's a 5 or 6 inch move quite often, but your charge, you get to roll 2 dice, and that could be an 8-inch move, and then you've got the potential for an extra 3, 6. I mean, some units have pile-in and consolidates to 6 inches now as well. There's huge amount. Or you could just have some Eldar Shining Spear unit that can travel something like 67 inches or something in a turn. But the charge phase is your way of going a huge distance, and it's incredibly powerful for that.
It's so powerful that strat in the Flyblade has almost made me buy a Death Guard army, I think, because I fond memories in 9th, right, when you had the chaplain allowing your units to pile and consolidate 6 inches as a Marine, and you had advancing and charging jump pack guys who somehow just tag into the aura, and something else kills them. This unit's moved another 12 inches after without even fighting anything. You're like, it's good times. Those are the days.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just to make sure that it's said, in case it doesn't come up later, that tying into this, as a combat player, you really have to think of charging as an additional movement phase, right? And I think the better combat players realize that it's not. This comes down to the minutiae that I'm sure we'll touch on about, basing and stopping yourself basing and knowing the rules, right? You have to end up closer to the unit, but it doesn't mean you have to go that way, right? You sort of go off in a different direction towards an objective, and you're just about closer, and you realize that the 3-inch consolidate at the end of all of this will get you onto the objective over there. Potentially gets you. I mean, it wouldn't be unreasonable to get you almost 12 inches of movement sideways onto an objective, right? You've rolled not even very far actually with piling and consolidates, right? It's really have to think about that. The killing is the fun bit, but the way to win the game is to kill and then use the movement to get where you need to be.
Yes, yeah, exactly that. It's very much one part of a wider process in terms of your scoring, in terms of your movement, in terms of your macro. So I think it sounds like we're sort of gearing up to go into a kind of macro micro discussion that I think probably brings us home. So let's start with the zoomed out. If we're thinking in terms of macro approach, what are some really fundamental sort of things for a combat army to have in their heads in terms of the overall zoomed out strategy in games of 40k at the moment?
I mean, where do you want to start? I'm sure I talk a lot, so feel free to shut me up. But no, I think that you have to realize the tools you're playing with, right? Not all armies do it the same way, right? And not all armies can really do it. I mean, as much as I like to shout combat Tau whenever some crisis hits charges something, it's knowing what are you trying to go for, right? I think there's a lot of understandable dislike of non-advancing and charging combat, or even stuff, Gladius Marines, right? Deathwing Knight type combat builds. Yes, you've got an advance and charge it, once per game for everything, and you can strat away and get a bit of extra speed, but that could easily be a 1, right? Like it's you're not a fast unit just because you can advance and charge. And it's knowing where you want the zones of engagement, as I like to think about it, right? You don't have to get to your opponent's home objective.
No.
The game is won in the midfield, right? If you somehow end up in a game state where you control all the objectives in the middle of the table, most of which are much more than a movement phases from your deployment zone, you'll win the game, right? I mean, your opponent's probably doing something wrong if you're just existing there, but so it's knowing the parameters in which you're working in, right? Do you have an army that's really, they tend to be tougher, I guess, to slower units. I mean, but design space, but that's okay, right? If you want to do combat focused Death Guard, sure, your Terminators move 4 inches a turn, but if you have a game plan that is, I can win this game if I can get to the halfway line and then make this mine. And then you build off that, right? The minutia goes off that. If you're super fast, it's an entirely different thing, right? You tend to be more fragile, and you're picking ideally areas of the board that they can't react to so much. Then you take control of that. A lot of Eldar used to do this with shooting, but you can do this with combat as well. If you're fast, and you can
blitz like one quarter and then move on. Yeah.
So it's just have the macro plan of, I'm using whatever it is. It's Votan Berserks. What does that mean to actually? What does that combat look like in reality, right? I can get to the midfield and charge from there, and I guess the wonderful mad thing about 40k is it's asymmetrical, right? The armies aren't all the same. The power doesn't all equal 100 at the end of it. Some very good armies aren't very good at combat, right? Eldar have 2 combat units, right? Others only have combat units, but so it's really that's the main thing, is just know what your win condition is at the big level before you start focusing on exactly how you implement it. Just
absolutely. And definitely having that sort of so knowing which parts of the board you need to be in, that's a really good piece of advice, and that's something I'm very guilty of, especially when I'm changing between armies. I take the habits from the ones I've been playing with me. The GSC is a very pick at the edges, be everywhere. If you try and play a different army like that, you're like, oh, this doesn't work. I don't have the resources or the space to stretch to to cover this. Max in the chat says we have way more than that. Do you though? Do you really?
Maybe 3.
No, they absolutely do. They have some very, very good combat units at the moment. Max is having a very good time with it. Run Eldar full stand. Do it.
Okay, that's fine. Not including characters. Characters are a separate thing, right? But
yeah. So that's probably in macro. I don't know if you, Chris or John, have anything to add to that.
It covers the general point. That's what macro.
I think that's the key, right? And we've kind of overlapped it. So if we're thinking into the minutiae and the small little things that matter a lot in combat, we've alluded to a whole bunch of these already, but what are the sort of the key things to be exploiting in your game to get the most out of the micro and 10th right now with melee?
I think, Raf, if you want to explain what your thought process is for when you're in what order do you move your models when you charge? Because that's obviously the first thing.
Yeah, that's a
lot
really
of
useful
people
one.
just go, oh, this goes there, and actually that is a mini game in itself. So I'd be interested, like, Raf, from your perspective, is it like it could be like, do you start with the models at the front to move them first? Do you start with the models furthest away? Does it matter how big your charge is or the distance? Like, what are you thinking about when you start moving your?
Unhelpfully, I guess, answer the question with a question, but you have to ask yourself what you're trying to get out of this, right? Is this in a beautifully isolated spot where you just want to get as many attacks as possible, right? And you're less worried about some things in your deployment zone, and you want to go back there and kick the warp spiders in the face, right? It's in a safe spot. It doesn't really matter exactly where you end up, right? You just gotta. Yeah. But a lot of the time, the combats are happening where you'll rarely be able to completely cancel out lines of sight or return fire, whatever, but you want to be able to engineer a position. I guess the classic situation is using the ability to consolidate towards an objective to try to pull your unit back into safety after engaging something behind the other side of the wall. So to do that, you need to have at least one model that's slightly out of position that can then use the rule mechanics of forcing the unit to keep in coherency by forcing that model to move back that way 3 inches allows you to cascade stuff in a certain way. So you kind of almost reverse engineer, like you're going, I need this model to not be in combat so that it can end up over here next to the objective, and then with a consolidate, move on to the objective and start pulling the stuff across. So then it's taking a step back and being like, okay, how do I block this out, right? Depending on what you've rolled. I mean, so it's just, unlike ninth, it's really, does dice gods play a big part here? You know, I've lost games because I rolled double 6 charges, and you're like,
yeah,
it happens a lot now. Yeah. It happens all the time. You're like, okay, now I'm screwed.
So a lot of the time it is. So it's hard to answer the question, I guess, in an abstract without having models in front of you. But I think it is just looking at that, I guess, coming from that side of where you want to end up, right? Do you want? Is this a charge that you want to get deeper into your opponent's lines with? In which case, you're trying to tag the far end and pull everything along. Or is it a little dart out that you then want to try to consolidate into a point where realistically they're going to get shot back a bit, but hopefully you don't lose the entire unit, right? Because maybe it's a slightly more macro thing, but a lot of combat armies don't actually want to do the trading thing, right? They want to hit and have something that survives to be able to hit again. And every activation you get with a combat unit after the first is winning, right? So it's that's my big focus is where you can do that.
I think that's really interesting actually, because I play Grey Knights mainly, and very rarely am I thinking about, or quite often in the positions I'm in, I'm more interested in trying to position it so that I can send my models to get onto another objective or tag something else, and like those are the sorts of armies that I like to play. I'm not so, if I send something out, it's gonna die, and I hope it does its job.
We're in that school of thought. Over
here, I'm that
MSU
type of player, and so I'm not fussed about this unit getting shot because it's dead anyway. So therefore, for me, it's very much like, can I block myself off as early as possible so my other stuff can go elsewhere? Because I'm probably not killing this thing anyway because my combat's a bit crap.
Great night life.
So I can go and tag things or nab that objective, and that's the way I've always played. I haven't played it in actually I don't want this thing to die. I'm kind of accepting that. So that's really interesting to hear, because I wouldn't ever really. Maybe I should try that.
I mean, interestingly, it's the little MSU units that can do the most out of it, right? But you do have to kill what you charge a lot of the time, otherwise it doesn't really work. So it's as also a Grey Knight player, I know that feeling. But it's actually tying into the point I was saying about knowing what the tools you have, right? So there's a lot of MSU combat out there that's amazing, and what you then want to do is look at where you can tag, because even stuff that most armies that have fall back and shoot, it's a strat, right? So, and a lot of it doesn't punch that well, right? So if you are lucky enough and you have 3 Grey Knight units that have made charges because stuff was nearby, and you get to tag 4 things after all of that, they're shooting the stuff they're in combat with. One thing is going to bug out and do whatever it wants, and even then it's not advancing and doing other stuff, right? So that's the real power, just knowing. And a lot of time, you can really fragile things. Go hug a tank, right? If you can encourage a tank to spend its time shooting this witch unit that's hugging it, fine. Right? It's going to die anyway.
One of its 5 turns doing that shooting. Yeah.
And this is again where the overload life intent is so powerful, because, as you say, a lot of armies have, and we've talked about this in relation to Eldar a lot, and we're going to have to again. Armies that have really powerful ways to abuse one-on-one situations struggle when you create a lot of situations at once, which reduces their ability to exploit those things. And if we're thinking about this, let's imagine this shooting army, right? It's had one turn maybe to shoot some stuff. Now you've attacked it with a whole army. It's got one turn of shooting at less efficiency because it's shooting into combat or whatever else, and maybe it gets one thing out, as you say. Some armies have some means of doing this. Very few have, full back shoot charge. Goddamn Gladius, you bastards with your sneaky once per game. I don't care every time.
We read Gulliman's book. It's all in there, man. It's all in there.
Oh dear, and so that's huge. That can be all it takes if it's executed right, and it's creating that. So there's a lot of little parts to play in that. Whether it's transports, suddenly this rhino's taking on the world and getting involved and blocking off space and tying things up. Your little trashy units are doing important jobs in tying different things up. And it's out of that the opportunities will then come to sort of put a proper shutdown on, right?
I think that's a really important thing. I mean, it's not. I don't know whether it's necessarily the micro of the thing, but just charging with your vehicles, like the amount of people that a big difference between when I play against different levels of opponents is a lot of people are just like, all the good players. Yeah, I'll shove this tank forward. Why not? Because you're getting movement. It's as having played Grey Knights, it's really annoying when my 5-man gets tagged by a fucking tank because I'm not picking it up. And I'm definitely not killing you, so I'm now just stuck prodding it with a force sword for a while, and that's a really powerful thing to do. So being aggressive, obviously, some matchups like you don't want to charge that thing because you will just kill, because they will just kill you. But a lot of the time, just using your vehicles in combat ways is actually a really important skill, and I think that probably extends itself. Like, combat isn't just for killing. Like, it's for moving, it's for stopping your opponent for getting what they want to do. It's stealing points, it's gaining points. It has so many things. Like, I think a newer player is just like, this unit kills things, so I'm just going to use it to charge things. Whereas actually you can utilize all of your units, your shooting units, your vehicle units, your combat units. They all have a whole variety of roles and can achieve multiple things. And sometimes it's nice, especially as I said, like you get in a matchup where you're suddenly in an issue. You've got, this isn't great for you, be it they're better at combat or whatever. It's like, well, how can you utilize your pieces in different ways than the norm? I mean, a classic thing, like having used to play like Harlequins, like your Star Weavers, once they're empty, that sort of thing. Go and send that. I'm sure that's going to be a whole new thing. People getting tagged by Star Weavers and Wave Serpents and Falcons and all that stuff. We all, the humble Vindicator can just roll along towards the middle of the bloody board, killing everything and never dying.
I love it.
That thing.
I absolutely love it.
It's like, transports are so powerful. Like, it's really, I know for me, because I don't use them with Grey Knights, but I'm building Eldar this. I'm like, I don't really want this many transports. They're a bit of a waste of space, aren't they? But actually, once you start playing them and using them in not just that, they've sat behind the ruin and let my Banshees charge off 20 inches away and kill thing. What do I do with it now? I guess it just sits here. Actually, if you start using them, and you almost use that overload approach, because who the hell wants to spend their turn trying to chop through 3 transports which are in their face, sat on objectives, tagging the important stuff? They want to be killing your other stuff, right? So combat has just so many uses.
I think a person would be surprised to realize how powerful a unit you can tie down with 2 Star Weavers.
Yeah.
Like one on either end of a unit. Mm-hmm. And you go, okay, these are made of paper. But you're like, yeah, but you only got 2, maybe 3 models that can swing on this. And you've not got whatever charge buffs are going on. Like, it's... And then a unit that can be like, I normally move X in advance and do Y. It's suddenly like...
I'm stuck here.
I might have to use my strat, if I have it, to fall back from this annoying... So quite often with that, it's little things like tagging in a Rhino, which are brilliant for this, onto the edge of an ongoing combat. Because sometimes you go in and you just, I don't know, you're trying to kill the character or just nuke it, part of the unit, whatever. Or a fight first unit where you just use a Rhino to soak up as much of its combat as possible and you sort of tag the other sides. Transports are amazing combat enablers on the offensive as well.
Yeah. Definitely. And there's a degree, I think in the micro, we've alluded to it again here, where it's like, tagging on the ends of units, putting stuff that doesn't matter in the middle, all these things. This is all good ways for playing around interrupts, playing around fights first, playing around opponents' counterplays and all this stuff. And there is there's a profiles thing as well, which is very useful, right? If there's a guy who will kill 5 Terminators with his sword, you give him 10 idiots, because he'll kill 5 idiots, right? Obviously, there might be sweeps involved, depends on the unit. But knowing what will keep things busy long enough, and applying those things in the right places is a big part to, again, achieving that shutdown and making sure you've got the opponent tied up. Because obviously, when someone was asking about the ups and downs of consolidating earlier on, for me, it's like consolidating is worth it as long as you're not going to die. Like the only time for me it's not worth it is if they outright kill you. Otherwise, there's almost always something, primary OC count maybe aside, where there are benefits, right?
No, you covered it with the primary OC, because the most dangerous thing about, and this happens a lot, even experienced players, right? You go, okay, I've done this, I've tagged this, this unit, and then you've got to remember you're giving them 6 inches of movement, right? So that's just a thing to bear in mind, right?
100%.
You can still back objectives that you've stolen already.
Yep. And you see good players going at it to tussle over an objective. It's never over. Like, the charge has been made, it's still not over, because someone will try and do everything they can to bamboozle their way through to getting what they need on the point. So you have to be very ready to very, very sharp understanding of your opponent's counterplays and options in that. Sequencing is very important as well. Where can they, for example, intervene? Well, you probably want to charge that unit, keep it busy. If you've got something to do that's great. Or if you've got an easier charge and you're worried about them moving off somewhere else, you've got to make sure you get that charge in first. So being very conscious of where they are. If you're like, oh, actually here, if they intervene, it's fine. It just brings them closer to other stuff I want to get into combat. That's okay. Avoid setting off interventions that can actually get them out of dodge. That's a very common one you see now, as people actually use intervention to run away from another charge, and then that actually creates points of failure. So it's just all about seeing the sequencing in terms of what they could do. It's the same with interrupts, right? Everyone does this. You look at the combats, you go, oh, that's 5 idiots. They won't interrupt, and if they do, it doesn't matter. So they can go last. We'll go over here where it's important for. And just making sure you get those basics hammered in. Where is their most dangerous unit? That's where we fight first. Get that dead. Don't let that interrupt. Applying that all the way across the board very consistently, I think, is really helpful with just making sure you pick your engagements well.
Simple quality of life thing as well. Be really clear about what you're trying to achieve with your opponent.
Yes.
The combat phase is an incredibly finicky aspect. Like, we've got a whole series of videos which Ed and I, Ed did, I sat there, on TPS, talking through various aspects of the combat phase. And it was very much measuring the 0.1 inches aspect of things. And because no one's got time for that, and the tape measure isn't really accurate enough for that, as it's really important if you're trying to get to closer to a particular place or be somewhere so that you can go one way rather than the other. It's really important that you're talking that through with your opponent. If you're trying to avoid heroic interventions, it's about going, right, okay, so can you just measure because if you don't, and then they go, oh, I can heroic here, and then you go, oh, I was trying to avoid the heroic, it becomes quite an awkward situation, because were you trying to avoid the heroic? Maybe you were. I mean, I certainly can be guilty of this. I'll eyeball it and be like, yeah, that's probably fine. And they'll be like, oh, can I heroic here? And I'm like, oh, shit. And it would be like, sometimes it goes one way, sometimes it goes the other. But actually, if you are just saying it, like, I keep referring to it because it's one of the games I remember most. But when I played Jack, it was very much, right, I'm trying to avoid heroics here. Can you just measure it out for me? And then it just avoids any sort of potential issues. So I think out of most aspects of 40k, I think the combat phase is probably one of the ones where you need to be mutually discussing it and what can you achieve. Like, I hate to say it, but a lot of the top end players try and pull off utter bullshit. And I've played some games and they're like,
you do need to know where they can go.
Like, I'm just going to go here now. I'm like, there's absolutely no way to that point. There is no way that you are defying physics there, mate. They're like, no, look, so I'm like, nope. And you have to, a lot of
people... You do need to be firm. There are plenty of situations where you need to be firm in your interpretation, your understanding of how it works. I
just really want to double down on that. I think almost the entire combat phase, other than the bit where you're just rolling the dice, right? Unless you got a unit that's just charged a knight, right? Then it's just all there and it's obvious, right? Whatever.
Yeah.
It's it's in many ways that's kind of what makes it the most fun part of the game, because it's actually interactive, right? As opposed to some guy over there with an Iron Storm list just shooting you and telling you how many saves you got to take.
Yeah,
every part of it, right? Every part of it from the beginning of your movement phase, I am 13 inches away from that unit, right? We all agree? Cool, that's 13. Fine. TTS is brilliant for learning all the stuff, but actually correctly highlighted the issues here, because Tape Measures are finicky. It's quite often the combats are happening in the mid-board or towards the opponent's edge. You're in the middle of a row. You can't be asked to always walk all the way around and backwards to measure every single thing backwards and forwards. Terrain gets nudged. Models get nudged. I think it's really important to talk through everything, right? It's like, okay, I'm here. I've rolled a 7. Okay, if you're trying to do anything that isn't obvious of like these models are going to engage these models, it's like, okay, for this model to try to get towards a subjective, we all agree that it's 9.7 inches away from this one. As long as I end up closer over there, it's fine. Everyone's fine. The heroic thing, just really re-stress that point that it's actually where you want to agree, because you don't want. And really, if you're at an event, this is what judges are for, right? If there's any confusion and they don't really understand how you're doing it, they've got nothing else to do. That's literally their job. You go, I'm doing this. They'll come over and say, yes, you can do that, or no, you're being an idiot. Don't do that. It's because games are won and lost on this, right? This is the gotcha's strong word, right? But I think, as was correctly pointed out, a lot of people don't actually know the minutiae of the combat rules.
Wishful thinking can kick in, I think.
Yeah, of course.
It even rolls back to when you've moved. I quite often, if I'm playing a combat army, I go, right, I've moved to here. I've measured here. This is how long my charge is going to be. If anything else gets moved, we know that's a 6-inch charge. Agreed? And then there's never an ambiguity when it comes back to you and you go, it's now a 9. It's like,
I
think when that's what your army relies on, you can't.
No, I think it's really good. And like when I played Ben Jones, he'll be like, "Oh, could you just measure that charge for me?" And you know what? There's no time you measure more accurately than when you are measuring your opponent's charge. And you're like, "Oh, I really need to be," because you don't want to.
Yeah, this better be a freaking 10.
Just make sure
you don't
give them your tape measure that has the inches slightly shorter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, very nice.
It's a 6 but yeah, like. I think that's quite nice, because it's like, I trust you, you measure me. And I'm like, yeah, sure. It's an 11, Ben. Good luck, mate.
And it's not a feel bad, because you just go, well, we know where we are.
Yeah.
It's an understanding.
Great. Awesome. Okay. I mean, I think we've hit a lot of the main notes I wanted to cover. I think obviously it's an endless world. There's an awful lot of depth to it. Well, I will encourage Raf, especially because he's our guest for tonight. We don't know when we'll see him again. So if you do have other ideas as we get through the questions, Raf, do shout things.
There have been a few.
We've picked. Have you going to pick a few out, Chris?
Yeah. Okay, so we've got
and then do shout us out, chat. If you have more questions, chuck them in. Anyway, you go, Chris.
Or
Dude
a super
Renomi.
chat.
Shut up, Scott.
Okay.
Dude Renomi says, he said this twice, so he clearly wants to know: is shooting always control and combat always the aggro?
Interesting. So my take on it is, I guess, a lot of the nuances of this depend on the format you're playing, right? So I think there's a teams versus singles thing here, right? Where a combat in a team setting where you're trying to basically get a draw type game, a combat army can be a very defensive thing. Of I'm just going to exist here, don't come near me, and you're going to.
You're controlling the space, aren't you?
You're controlling the space defensively. And some armies with speed that can do I'm going to go back to Drakari as the example, can do I'm going to throw this one unit, Eldar as well, especially now, right? Eldar, I'm going to throw this unit 23 inches away, right? And take your home off you in a turn. You can actually play that quite defensively. I mean, I'm going to exist here, and you missile out. Nanavati was, this is his favorite playstyle, famously, the Art of War American guy. Just throw out. Normally, though, generally, people are taking combat because they want to go over there and punch people, right? Not always, but generally speaking, and shooting can be very aggressive, right? I'm on a team with Naz. Nothing in the world is more aggressive than the way he used Tau, right? Back in 9th edition, right? It's like he's in your deployment zone turn 1 if he possibly can be, and shooting you in the face. Yeah. But I think as a generality, it's probably true, but I think there's specifics that go the other way.
I think the speed of the relative parties plays a big role in the relationship between the two. Like fast gun, good. You hear that a lot, right? But it's like I remember I played against Lewis Smith's Tower at Battle of Britain, and he's very conscious that actually outside of some gene stealers, my army's pretty slow. It's got a good delivery, but it's pretty slow. So he's stretching and pushing and making lots of things happen and taking advantage of that. But if I've been playing like a World Eaters, he's not putting a bunch of different Tau units in the places he's putting them. Right? It's a very different game. So I think that has a big say in the relationship, like the relative threat ranges of the guns and the melee units in question has a big role in who's sort of controlling and who's asking questions. We've got a good question from our very own Ed, who is always on the pulse with the important issues, and asks, "What's Raf's opinion on moths?"
On moths?
Yes, on moths.
Got him.
Wow, there's a question. I'm slightly disappointed that I don't have a stronger view on moths at this point.
We are too.
Yeah, I mean, immediately I think sort of Hannibal Lecter is like when you say moth.
Oh yeah.
So that, or there's a terrible moth, some other film from the 90s, whatever. But you know, look, who doesn't like even furrier butterflies, right? This is
damn right.
My carpets.
Well, we should probably have an intervention about that, and I think we can deal with that. But you know, flying insects that terrify my wife are funny inherently, right? So there's an element to that. But
I totally agree.
Combat butterflies is what I think of them. There you go.
Yes, that's exactly right. Obviously, the moth is just the combat build of the butterfly.
I was going to say, so yeah, if you were to build a moth as a 40k unit, would you say it was a flying combat creature?
Yeah.
Fast-moving scoring units. Nice.
Combat Vespid, basically.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Don't give Tau like blades. They don't need that.
Hey, they've got one, and they get to share it around. Right? They're very proud of it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're going to pick some questions out of the podcast questions. So we had one. Oh, sorry, you go, Raf.
Sorry, no, I think we touched on it in broad terms earlier. Just something Sam asked on the thing here about the timing of it.
Yes.
I just wanted to re-stress that point. It's an impossible question to answer at a basic, but I think there's a certain amount of playing chicken with yourself, right? So when the last couple of events I took, one was a full combat list and the other was mostly combat, is understanding the pace of the game, and against faster armies being like, depending on the mission, they are going to get 15s at least turn 2, maybe turn 3, because it's a trap if I try to. Firstly, it's quite hard to even make that charge to get that rhino that's on the edge over there on the search and destroy missions. If they sort of get something all the way on the edge there, and you've got infantry combat, it's actually really hard to get there. So it's knowing the overall pace of the game and then what you can make happen, and be comfortable with the fact that they might get ahead of you on the score. And no one likes that, right? No one likes to be the point of like, I'm going to get 5 primary for being on my home. My opponent's going to get 15 because I'm not prepared to throw piecemeal bits of my army out.
Yeah.
So, and you've touched on it before, but it's about then making sure that, I had a ton of that, but then the following turn when I connected in this versus CSM player, I had 8 charges or whatever it was. I charged entire across the line, so that, touching on what we said earlier, then he has to react to all of that, and can he, right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's my. I think it's just
I think that's really
hard to get right. I think that's a practice thing. That's.
I am very bad at not knowing when to just pass up a primary denial opportunity. I just will always. I'm a sucker for it, and then you're like, oh, I have no stuff, and I'm dead. And it's very important to know when it doesn't matter at this stage in the overall macro of this game. It is fine if they have that, because a turn from now, I'm going to give them a lot more problems, and ultimately that is what will decide this, not one turn of 5s extra or whatever else. Big old Jim asks, how do you get the most out of a flimsy melee unit that hits hard like Sword Brethren when you're against a skilled player who can screen and bait with chaff?
Do shut me up if I'm talking too much. No,
that's what you're here for, Raf.
Look, people have different views on this. I think there's a reason why a well-constructed combat army has some shooting, right? And as much as it pains me to say that. So, once again, terrain dependent, because UKTC can, a lot of the blocking can happen just standing an inch behind a wall. First lesson every Marine has learnt: stand an arm's length away from a wall.
Yeah,
you're safe.
You're invincible.
Yeah. But it's about quite often it's about not committing them straight away. All right. So the existence of the unit ties into a lot of what we said earlier about the threat of it existing, right? So last Blood Angel book, for example, a lot of what felt like 1,000-point Sangre Guard unit was doing was existing in the middle and not falling for the trap of, I'm going to have to kill this chaff piece. And that's, I think, what I said really early on about having the right tools for the right jobs is, in my combat lists, things have changed. But like quite often, you'd be like, okay, I need to start killing some screens. I'm going to throw a jump back intercessor unit, and it's going to do two jobs. Ideally, it kills something and is then hidden somewhere nice, but it might not be. It's just, I need to kill the screen. I need to kill the screen because it's not going to go away. They're going to keep screening.
In fact, it's about having the right tools. If you leave it.
You don't want to commit Helbrecht and Sword Brethren to a cultist screen, right? They'll kill the universe if you let them hit it. But it's the most obvious trap is obvious. And sometimes you have to trade down. I think there's an understanding. People expect that you're like, I'm using a 200-point unit. I don't want to lose it to kill a 100-point unit. Board states aren't even, right? I think killing, not everything has the same value, right? If they have 2 units that realistically are going to be screens that they don't care about losing, sometimes it is worth sacrificing something that's actually a bit more important, but it gets that out of the way. Ideal world, you kill them both, whatever, but like it might not be the case, right? But so I think it's about pacing again. It's about not.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as a Grey Knight player as well, though, I mean, this is the heart of the danger of using combat and why I call it a knife fight. Is sometimes you just have to go for it and be like, right, I'm going to charge the screen, and I've got 10 Terminators, and I'm hoping, the screen's going to be dead. Your entire army is then going to spend the entire turn shooting this unit.
Yeah.
Other stuff is doing other stuff.
Yeah.
Not every army could do that, right? But
yeah. But I think for me that's definitely a role that unit can play. Because it's a little bit less squishy than some of the other Templar stuff. It can be part of the go turn that you're losing it or losing a chunk of it is fine. Obviously, the ultimate that is a classic example of a good combat unit where ultimately if they don't get all the way to Helbrecht, they've still got problems, right? Because Helbrecht is very, very good, and so that's a lot to chew through before you actually get to the man himself.
And the other option is full send, right? Like you have to kill this crappy unit with the Sword Brethren and Helbrecht. They're definitely going to die back, right? That's all they have to focus on. If they also focusing, I don't know what else you've got on that list, right? But if you've got the Feel No Pain Terminator unit over there or whatever else, right? Like also pushing in, ask them the questions. The more times they have to make decisions, the more mistakes they can make, and threat optimization is hard.
Yeah. Completely. Oh, hello to Bonsai Kitty Gamer. He's in the chat as well. Welcome. Right, pick a few more questions out. We had Trash Alex asked, which mirror match would be the worst to play? What's the worst mirror you've ever played?
That's a question.
Thousand Suns mirror sucks ass. I hate it. I absolutely despise it.
At that point, both Thousand Suns players deserve it, though, right? So
yeah, they really did. They really did.
You played that against Luxembourg, didn't you?
I did. So it was a beautiful 10-10. But it's a very funny matchup because Magnus on both sides will just melt if he goes anywhere near the army. So it has a really big impact on how you play the game.
I once played a mirror where both of us had 30 Grey Knight Terminators, 3 Librarians in each unit.
How many blew themselves up?
Oh,
I don't think anyone even shot. They just went, we have Feel No Pain against each other. We're just going to let's hug it out.
But what happened on the tabletop?
We never got to the tabletop. It got steamy. It was.
I was going to say I played the Grey Knight mirror and I didn't have Librarians and he did, and so his entire Terminator army had Feel No Pains against me and I didn't, and it wasn't very fun at all. So that was miserable. I can tell you.
Yeah. For me, it was Bully Boys into Bully Boys, peak Bully Boys, but the opponent had.
What about the table, though?
Stuff.
Oh, sorry.
And so he could just hit me harder because there was more of it. And it was unfortunate. It was the one game I lost that weekend.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it will depend on what you don't like, right? I think stat check on stat check tends to be dull, right? It's
just
whereas, who rolls better, who makes the one mistake that sort of spirals out of control. I think some of the fast combat stuff can be fun. I mean, I hate mirrors fundamentally. Just because
Jakari mirror is extremely fun.
Yeah.
It's extremely fun because it's so much death and so much nonsense going on. It's very, very good. And for the first time, they're exactly as flimsy as you are in it. It all feels right.
Death Guard combat mirrors must be fun, where the first 4 turns are spent walking towards each other, and then
and then they've both got about 8 CP for -1 damage everywhere, so it just goes in and nothing happens, and then that's the end. Nice. Yeah. Ultimate Funk asks, what is your hobby / in-game superpower thing you do really well in a game or just generally?
Roll 2s.
Yeah, actually, that is you're fucking amazing at rolling 2s. So.
When I'm hitting on 3s.
Always when you're hitting on 3s. Often re-rolling 1s, but it's the 2s. It's the 2s for John. Chris?
What was the question? What's
your superpower in the game? Score projection, isn't it?
Yeah, apparently.
You just did a video on it.
Yeah, that's what people don't say. I don't know. I think I'm quite good at playing like the tradey game, like that sort of like that. It's mainly because of the armies I've always played, but I'm very much not of the. I would really struggle to take an army which just is all about threat saturation, just because it's not something I've ever done with. In fact, all I've ever played is how can I achieve what I need to with the absolute bare minimum of resources. So I think that's probably something I'm quite used to doing and reasonably good at.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like the Admech Plains.
No, I hated that army. I mean,
the minimum resources. You had like
all of the planes,
everything.
And,
you're dead, so doesn't matter, does it, mate? Bye.
That was very skillful. That one.
That was highly
skillful.
I remember playing my first ever Saffron Slam, and I didn't understand the approach that Lewis liked to take to his Saffron Slam events, which was just a bit more chilled, competitive. So I Admech were reasonably new. I had 4 Admech planes, and I submitted that list. And then I looked down at like the other 20-something lists and was like, "Oh, I'm really sorry." And we got to the final game, and everyone was obviously rooting for me to lose. I played into like White Scars, and they like Jack had given him advice, and the advice was basically deploy on the line and hope you go first. And I then won the roll off to go first, and just had to be like, "I'm really sorry." And it was just it wasn't a fun time, guys. So actually, you know what? Didn't actually really enjoy that army. So
it's not fun.
I've seen the light now. Back on Eldar.
You have. Would you run the Admech planes if they were good?
Yeah, of course. No. I'm actually thinking of selling my Admech. So.
Oh no,
sad Mech.
And my next one.
So tell everyone that they're really, really good right now.
Yeah, anyway, right now, I actually have the Netta build. So keep an eye out on eBay for the next. Because your new 2 could be like Johnny Simmons. New 2 could be like Johnny Simmons.
Yeah, they're easy to pick up. Really easy. Bonsai Kitty Gaming in the chat has a question for their Raptors themes list. Bonsai Kitty Gaming asked about Raptors quite a bit, which is awesome. So
thank you for the super
in the list. Yes, thank you very much for the super chat, Bonsai Kitty Gaming. They've got 3x5 man scouts in the list. How do you think you should use them? Is this a scout and infiltrate to slow the enemy melee army, or is that going to have the opposite effect and end up with them slingshotting into you faster? It's sort of a risk analysis, isn't it?
It's like, what's their threat range, right?
Yeah, that's where you put them, to be fair. So
the boring answer is almost never worth screening with scouts. Right? I think scouts are far too valuable. I think it's actually not until relatively the mid game where I'd actually feel comfortable throwing scout units away for anything less than for points generally. Right? I think turn 1 area denial, I don't want to throw my scouts away necessarily. Right. Maybe if you also have secure or something, maybe it's a 10-point play or whatever the points add up to. But yes, it's the threat range, right? I think some armies get hindered by the screening much more than others, right? World Eaters, in theory, if they go first, can move. I don't even have far, right? They can go far,
a long way,
and that is limited to 9 inches if you deploy 9 inches away. But then it's about knowing where to put them, right? So because 9 inches and then they can consolidate onto an objective means it's actually 12 plus inches, right? Even more if they get round. So if it's somewhere where they charge it, they're going to kill that thing, but can't consolidate onto something, then it might be worth losing 1, maybe 2 if it's a full, like if you're really scared of a full-on rush.
Yeah.
But generally keep them alive. They're too good.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, that's very, very much the case. And I don't know how you're running your Raptors bombs. Like obviously, if it's Vanguard, you've got other ways to get out of dodge and avoid charges and that sort of thing. You don't need to be sacrificing the poor scouts. They have it hard.
If you're running Vanguard, scouts are gold, right? The anti-charge tech in Vanguard. Oh,
so good. It's ludicrous. I hate it. It's so good. So good. All right.
I think wherever you deploy them, they should be 6 inches more forward than you would want them to end if you're going second. If that makes sense. So you can go back. So when they do their reactive scout, like their scout move at the beginning of the game, you just pull them back so that always going to be safe. You can give them the impression you're being
them.
aggressive. So
when you deploy your scouts, anything with a scout move, you would always want to know, right, if I go first, this is where I'll go. If I go second, this is where I'll go.
So behind a wall.
For those of you who have recently acquired striking Scalpions, same logic applies. They do the exact same thing now. So just keep an eye on that. Just apply all those lessons, and they're just as handy in just the same ways. Yeah. Cool. We've got one last question from Sectix, which is, how much would you count as an average amount to spend on this hobby in a year? I'm not answering that one.
My girlfriend might be watching, so...
denied.
No.
The trick is to find a life partner who has a more expensive hobby than yours, and then it's all
genius.
Right, that's the.
That's
turns
key.
out perfume's like really expensive. And in life, make early good life choices and pick an army that you can basically. There are some armies out there, you could use the same army for pretty much the entire edition. And
Don't collect Marines.
Votan.
Touch Marines. Whatever you do.
Marines are nonsense.
Marines are,
It's been fine.
Except they all come in peaks and troughs, I think is probably the main thing. Like, I actually went through a few months where I've not bought anything of any real value because I haven't needed to. I'm screwed. It's an absolute nut job.
What is that?
That's 3 Vindicators.
No, just 2.
Why?
Just 2. This one's this is
son?
a Predator.
Okay.
I only had one.
That's fine then.
Vindicator.
That's fine. Okay.
So, then that's fine. Vindicator's real good, to be fair.
But,
for now.
Yeah, just, except that sometimes there are going to be new releases that you are really invested in. Other times it will decide. It probably depends a lot. The average is just going to be so hard to work out, isn't it? Because it depends a lot on what sort of player you are. Are you playing once a month with a mate? In which case you're probably buying that box and painting it and having that nice time and then putting it on the table. If you're someone who's heavily...
If you're still in that phase, you're fine.
Well done.
If you literally just buy a thing, you build and paint it, you use it, and then you buy the next thing, if you've managed to stick at that,
you are mental.
Don't worry.
How?
Hard cut to a mistakes were made meme somewhere along the way. And,
exactly. If you're going to put away the stuff you just bought and you find the army that you bought but you haven't got around to actually doing it, and you're like, oh no, that's how it can get. So obviously that's where you maybe you want to keep an eye on those average spends.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Raf, thank you so much. This has been really, really fun. Everything I hoped it would be. Thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in. We've had a great time, and we'll be back again very soon. See you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.